and I just want to say thank you very much as well for the invitation, and Mark, but Belfast isn't far away. It's really no big deal, and but also just to say that one of the things Mark and I want to do is kind of discussion, so we're sort of going to start a little bit, we're going to show you what it looks like, demonstrate discussion, discourse, and then we're going to bring you into that. So, because I've heard all of the things that are in my head, I haven't heard the things that are in your head, so I'm more interested in that, really. And I'm sure it's the same for Mark. But we just thought we'd start in this way by the beginning, and I thought, because Mark obviously is the archetypical sort of male, successful tutor, alpha male, you have everything going for you. You're tall, you're called Mark, which is, not complicated, right? So it's likely you'll be a CEO, although I think John is better, isn't it? Better to be John, yeah. And then, so you've got everything going for you. Yep. So I thought maybe that's not necessarily the best reading of you, and maybe it would be good to hear about your experiences of going through, even as a student, your experiences of going through architecture, what that felt like, and did you at times feel in any way oppressed or suppressed or, I don't know, or elevated, or did you swim with the flow?
I swam and I swim with the flow to a large extent, but I have never really felt oppressed because I do believe I have a belief, despite myself, despite the evidence all the time, that it's me who's responsible for everything, and if I'm not succeeding with anything, it's because of my own inadequacies, my own failures. And this comes back to being a student, because we had studio culture, just like you do, with crits. I experienced personally a lot of anxiety around the system. Having work reviewed, was desperately keen for positive reviews, and desperately envious of people who got them. But then, even if I got them myself, I'd be very complicated and I'm unable to just take it. And I know a lot of you don't have this problem, so I'm not saying this is universal. But what happened was I started teaching. I wasn't asked, I just turned up to teach, and I've been here ever since. I just thought it would be cool to start talking about this with people, and it has been. But I found I had the same problem with the crits at the beginning, certainly, and I still do. I found that I was going as a tutor, having a lot of ego issues around me, and a lot of anxiety and feeling of being on the spot.
And you still have that feeling?
I still have a lot of that stuff going on. So, 10 years ago or so, a colleague called Brian Ward, and actually strips of DIT, and I just want to take this opportunity to say, repeat something you said to me, one of your Twitter people you've been contacting with Twitter, tweeted to say that this was a great, unusual initiative from students.
From Auckland. Oh, really? Yeah. No, it's a woman I met through doing some writing together, and I sent out some news with us, and she wrote back saying that it was brilliant to see a student initiative such as this. And I thought, isn't it great somebody on the other side of the world would know what's going on? So, anyway.
Well, it's a great student initiative, and in DIT there was some of that too. They had the ASA, the Architectural Student Association. And they, 10 years ago, organised a series of events about education. And Brian Ward, who I'd worked with here, invited me. He recommended me, and the students invited me. And it was a whole shift of perspective for me, because up until then I had this kind of personal baggage about the crit and about the difficulties of it, and all the ego issues. And I tried not to be egotistically involved. But something in me started to think, well, maybe it's not just me. Maybe there is something seriously going on here in the crit, some serious structure or some serious type of event, which is very hard not to be feeling oppressed by, or the weight of, the social weight.
So when you're feeling something like that, what do you turn to, or where do you go to overcome that? How do you understand it? And here I'm sort of thinking about theory and also movements. And so I'm wanting also to know whether you would class yourself as a feminist. Do you look to feminist theory to make sense of that, or do you look to other areas of theory to make sense of it?
Well, that was it. When I was asked to take part in that lecture, I went to the library over there to look up Althusser. Louis Althusser, I heard about this idea of the ideological state apparatus. I thought, it is like an apparatus. And that sounds like a cool idea. And when I was there, I discovered Bourdieu. And that kind of blew my mind completely, because Bourdieu is completely critical of education as what he sees as a structure. I'll stick it up on the thing here, the sentence, if you don't mind, because it's a difficult enough sentence, but kind of worth writing. His language is difficult, but the difficulty of it is kind of useful because it makes you stop. Makes me stop. Just by even just having a sentence like this, which makes you want to have to read it a few times. So surely, among all the solutions put forth throughout history to the problem of transmission of power and privileges, there does not exist one that is better than that which the educational system provides, by contributing to the reproduction of the structure of class relations, and by concealing, under an apparently neutral attitude, the fact that it fulfills this function. And so this really shifted it for me, because I thought these crits are really powerful things, and they involve a lot of heavy social weight.
So he's criticising education in terms of power, class, or?
He's saying that it works because it conceals its power operation. It appears to be, education appears to be presenting neutral, what he calls neutral information, or what elsewhere he or people like Gramsci describe as objective or natural theories of truth and justice and beauty and so forth. But he's actually analysing the ways in which these values get reproduced because of power structures. So once I started thinking about crit like that, I started trying to organise things. And we organised a thing in DIT a couple of years ago, and I've been trying ever since to go. I hadn't got to feminist theory, particularly, and it's only something that I'm starting to come around to. I've not been doing that.
So you wouldn't think of yourself as a feminist?
I would think I would.
Because I would.
Okay, well,
I think.
Yeah, I shared something with you earlier, which is a book I read recently about Lenin, where it's just another. I like ideas, and I realised that the practice of particular discussion we're hoping to have here today is not going to be all just about these ideas. But a friend of mine wrote a book on Lenin recently, and he said that class, when we look at all these systems of oppression, race, class, ability, sexual orientation, and gender, physical ability, we are looking at a whole series of different types of categories of unfairness, or what's the word, discrimination. But he says that for Marx and Lenin, class was the master category. And the proof of the argument is, I like this idea, is that we do want men and women to be equal if we want the world to be better, and we want people of different colour to be equal, to be treated equally, people with sexual orientation and different physical ability to be treated equally. But we don't. We're not looking for equality between classes. We don't want the classes to be equal. We don't want classes. The very fact of class is only because of inequality. Class is the form of inequality, and we're trying to get beyond that. And so therefore, our education here, insofar as it does contribute to the structure of class relations, includes prejudice, notwithstanding the fact that it's a liberal education, in which supposedly men and women are treated equally, in which supposedly people of different abilities are treated equally. Nonetheless, there is in fact actually a pay gap, a serious pay gap, serious discrimination in relation to women in our profession. And I believe it's concealed, like Bourdieu says, beneath the apparently neutral attitude. So that's my theory that I've come at this with, and I'm just trying to develop that. I wasn't such a personal reply, and I think I'm not a feminist, by the way, as far as I believe I'm conditioned. I don't want to blame anyone here, but I was sent to a Catholic boarding school in the 70s where homophobia was absolutely rife, and I believe it was instilled in me, despite my own actual orientation. And also, I believe, in terms of class, I was brought up in a middle-class environment, comfortably off, and I still have those views. I still have attitudes about working class people, which are almost like indoctrinated. And I say that without.
But it's always. I mean, feminism is social justice.
Yeah.
But it also begins with liberating yourself.
Yeah.
You know. So, and I think a feminist attitude is one about understanding that you have to liberate yourself in order to be part of a process that liberates others. And for me, that's why I think you are, I would see you as a feminist because I think you're in pursuit of that liberation, in pursuit of untying those bounds and those social norms that tie us down, I suppose.
So I suppose the key is that they're indoctrinated to some extent, they're ingrained.
Yeah, no, but we're all indoctrinated.
What about, because we were hoping to spend 10 or 15 minutes talking about ourselves, we could draw on that, and it was okay for me to ask you about your route to where you are today as
in this conversation.
In this conversation, to arrive
so
here
it
today.
kind of begins in UCD. I don't know if anyone is here remembers, but years ago I got involved in a research project that was based here at UCD. It was to do with disability studies. And I was just recalling, I was looking at a text in the way down in the train today. It's called The F Word in Feminism, or F Word in Architecture, sorry. And it's written by a woman called Sherry Aronson. I think that's how you say her name. And she also wrote, co-authored a paper in the Journal of Architectural Education called Stars, I think Sex, Stars and Studios. Yeah, so it talks about the crit system, and it was kind of the first outing of feminism within architectural education. So she was a very significant person for me, but I discovered her when I was here because that research project that I was involved in, maybe I'd read a little bit about her, the Sex, Stars in the Studio work. It was quite well known at the time. So the research project was to do with disability. So my way into feminism has been through disability studies. So I've never really been, maybe in a similar way that I've been interested in the injustice that I see in other people's lives, but I never reflected in my own. Could it be? So I was really interested in disability studies, and that was what I was doing. And I ordered a book that was called Reconstructing Architectural Education, Critical Discourses, I think, and it was co-authored, or co-edited by a guy called Tom Stutton, who passed away recently, but a very significant character in American architectural education. He was very critical of it, but also a really extremely good scholar and also an awesome pedagogue in many ways. He did a lot of social practice with his students. And in that book there is this wonderful essay, The F Word in Architecture, which is really worth reading, because even still today when I read it, it's crystal clear about identifying where the issues lie. So in a way, I ordered that book, and I was sat over in an office on the other side of the quadrangle when it arrived, because it cost it's the most expensive book I've ever ordered at that time in life. It was something like £54 or whatever. I think, was it sterling? No, it wasn't sterling. I can't remember what currency it was, but it was very expensive. Hard copy, but I chewed it from top to bottom, and it really helped clarify things. And in a way, I think feminism has always done that for me. It's definitely the thing that I turn to whenever I don't understand things. I don't understand why I feel as if I'm the problem. We were having a discussion earlier on about being identified. I'm always identified as being the difficult person. Recently I'm told I'm perceived as difficult, which of course has huge resonance within any understanding of women in society, because women are labelled the nags. Anything, as soon as we start to raise a voice, I think we're seen as being a problem, because we're bringing something else to the table that's not necessarily wanted. However, what I definitely want to say is that over the course of my career, and I'm looking over in this direction, I ended up getting married and having a male son and a female daughter. I don't know. And,
CIS gender. It's not transgender.
Yeah. Not yet.
You guys see this. You can see what
Who knows where they will go.
Come around a bit if you like. There's a lot of people around there.
Yeah,
There's space around the other side if you like. Sorry.
And I wanted really to address that, because I think when I was a young woman, I was reading all this stuff, I definitely was quite a radical feminist. I want the world to
wanted to ask you about. You talk about that.
Yeah, and recently I got involved in co-editing a book called The Gender Profession, and it's about the architecture profession. It's a great book. I think from the point of view, it was published by the RIBA, but what's good about it, because I'm very keen to make all the stuff I do as accessible as possible, or being involved in a wider discourse, not just within the profession. And that book is, we constructed it in such a way that the chapters are all very short, so that people in the profession or anywhere could just delve into it and find themselves. So it's called a gender profession because it's really trying to get as wide a perspective on what is the experience of people from a whole range of genders and a whole range of sexual identities. What is their experience within architecture? Because feminism has moved on, so it isn't just about women. It is about the pursuit of the liberation of everyone. It is about social justice. So it was very important that we have the editorial teams made up of 4 people from very different backgrounds, all of which kind of, just by accident, almost mapped across the spectrum. But the one voice that wasn't present was the white male, middle class, middle-aged architect. But I happen to know some of them. so I.
Your best friends,
one of my closest friends in architectural profession is one of those, and he's also the person who every so often phones me up and takes me out for lunch to tell me exactly how crap architectural education is, just to remind me that the guys you send out with are useless to us, right? So, and I love that conversation because I like being reminded that we're not perfect, and there's stuff to do. So I interviewed him, and that experience was quite phenomenal, and I think it's worth reading the chapter just to see it, because in that discussion, so it was over a period of 3 evenings, and I said we would co-author the chapter. What happened was my lovely friend John sat behind his desk, and I sat on a little stool beside with my laptop, and I essentially wrote down everything that he said. So it was a very, I felt really like a secretary. But I had a few questions and I posed those to him. After, I think the first and the second evening I drove home, I really wanted to kill him. And I just thought, what an architect. And he has no understanding of the struggle that I've had, because his father was an architect, and his father actually got him a place to study architecture. His father got him his first and second job. His father helped him launch his career. And John did very well. But he kind of hit the peak of being in a commercial practice, was a director. I had known him over my lifespan as an architect, and his life kind of fell apart. He had no relationships, and he worked excessive hours. He would leave the practice. He had full responsibility for putting bread on the plate of all the employees, which he told me quite frequently that, you live in the bubble, Ruth, you're out of reality. The reality is that I'm forced to go out and get whatever jobs I can to employ the people I have. And he probably drank too much, he definitely smoked too much, and he went from being an extremely handsome man to being a very, very fast into middle age. And the stress of that career, that addiction to excessive work, I suppose, and that kind of, almost it's kind of an element of pride, that excessiveness of work, it really caused him to, I think he was very much on the verge of a breakdown. Fortunately, he was saved by meeting a fantastic woman, and they had a child. And John gave up that practice and went into solo practice on his own, so now he does most of the childcare. So in the third evening, he was then, I know this, I know his story, but in the third evening, he was articulating that move to me. And he talked about how the fact that he felt that architecture and that way of being an architect had in a way infantilized him, had not allowed him to mature emotionally in terms of relationships, and the fact that he was kind of left at a point where he didn't really understand the world as the rest of us understood it, I suppose, or other people understood it. And on that way home that evening, I realised that I was free. I've never been bound by definition of what architecture is, because I've never felt comfortable with the definition of architecture as I've been told it, as I've been taught it, and how I've witnessed other people teach it. So for me, the architecture is always what the architect does. That's the easiest definition for me. So it's not about space, it's not about buildings, it's not about blah blah blah. It's what we do, because we are trained to think and act, and we have a certain set of skills, and it's how we then apply those skills. And so I've never been trapped into thinking that I had to be an architect in this way, and I had to do that or whatever. And so and he was trapped by those norms that our profession has been bound up in. But of course now he's free of those too. And I realised that, you know, there is a real plus to being on the edge, on the periphery of a profession.
Does anyone, I mean, that's to listen to that story of this man and a friend.
Yeah.
And
Sorry, I went on too long.
No, it's right, because it leads into, I believe, the heart of the thing we're hoping to talk about, is what is it that caused him to believe that he had to be this thing, that caused him to sacrifice so much of what's important about living, to kind of make a sacrifice to the altar of, and do people feel that it may, because obviously this is a leading question, I do think that the structures of our education do encourage this. And do people, for instance, have people had an experience by a crit, being very stressed in advance of it, and very upset or possibly over-elated afterwards? Do people think this might in any way have something to do with the thing you're talking about? That lack of perspective, that lack of balance, that sense of absolute subjection to an ideal. What is this ideal? Would anyone at this stage like to join the conversation about this? This is obviously, I by the way have to say that if I was out there, I wouldn't want to, because I never want to, even though I'm always in front of you guys blathering on, I actually never want to be the person to say the thing. And which is another aspect of our education, I believe, is the social forces, particularly at crits. They're very, very powerful and unacknowledged. Our desire to be admired by our peers is the strongest thing. Or put it this way, our fear of humiliation in front of our peers is the strongest thing. And our ideology of the crit is that this is just a discussion about your work among professionals. But it's not. It's a potential social crisis for you. And I believe the structure, I'm a great believer in the structural analysis. I do believe the structure is...
Yeah.
I believe the structure is unfixable, but I won't go into it now, but my colleague Patrick Flynn, with whom I organised the thing in DIT about crits a couple of years ago, he and Ryan Ward and a couple of others, Joanna Cleary, who is a researcher, have been running third year this year in DIT without crits, replacing them with other forms of review, with very interesting results, which I will let you know at some other time. I can publish them. He's already published some of these first. Basically, the results are a lot less stress, obviously, and way more better feedback and better work.
Don't you think sometimes there's sometimes we associate stress with that's a good thing, you know. So if you went through a review of your work and you came out the other end and you enjoyed it, you might not think it was as good value as if you'd gone through a tough crit. We have a weird kind of thing that goes on in architecture. Anyway, so I'm interested to know as well about your views about your crits or your tutorials, or we were talking a little bit earlier on about discourse, where that happens. Where do you have your conversations about architecture?
Yeah, it's a good one. Where would you? Oh,
I think there's not the same thing we were saying, that when you talk to your friend and you tell me about like when there's something wrong and you actually enjoy that there's something wrong because then you can improve on it and get better with it. So maybe that's the same thing with the crit, like. But I know what you mean by when it comes into like being stressful and stuff like that, because there's a lot of, like at the start I felt like there's a lot of hidden rules that I didn't know about, like, but I'm not sure what it is. But I guess that could answer the question that you're saying. Why do you like come out kind of not happier but kind of more motivated after a bad crit, but not a bad crit because you heard what you're supposed to do, you know? Like a almost too positive crit doesn't do much, because like a bad experience teaches you more than a good experience, and I think that kind of ties to that answer, I think.
So if you're sitting in the pub and having a conversation with your mates,
Yeah.
do you not think you're learning as well?
No, yeah. I'm I'm saying there's always, you can be constructive, like, sometimes, like, again, the tutors are people, like, so sometimes you catch them in, like, a certain day, or, do you know what I mean, like, and even though, and also, sometimes it's just a discussion, like, sometimes one image is, like, talked about more than anything else, and kind of gets lost there, and you're like, I didn't get hurt or something, or, well, I'm not really sure how you could fix that, to be honest, like, I don't know, but it's just to kind of answer.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I often hear myself saying to people that good learning is often uncomfortable because you're moving into a zone that you've not been in before.
Humiliation is the best way to learn that.
But at the same time, I also know that we do stuff that is, I run live projects which the students really enjoy, and every year it gets fantastic feedback on levels of enjoyment, but if you ask them, did you learn? They probably would think they enjoyed it more than they learned, and yet I definitely witnessed their learning.
Yeah,
So there is a kind of, sometimes when we enjoy things we don't always see the real meat of the experience, isn't it? So
Experience of overwork about crits, or a contribution about health issues. Has anyone had, could anyone say anything about all-nighters, for instance? How many people here have done all-nighters? So something probably, probably less than when we were doing them. Maybe that's something that we were drinking less and doing less all-nighters. Because there's something addictive. You mentioned addiction, and there's something association with perfectionism and addiction, which counsellors will tell you about.
right.
People standards themselves all their lives actually can develop very.
But you know, that sounds so romantic, doesn't it? And I think we have a way of over-romanticising some of the stupid things we do. So I would also say that one of the reasons why we do all-nighters and we have excessive work behaviour is because I don't think architects are particularly good at managing their time. You know, I think it's a huge flaw. And I think one of the things, and it comes back to a feminist and a gender perspective for me, because I think when people are doing multiple tasks, you know, if you've got to look after kids, if you're a carer, or looking after your parents, and you're also doing a job, and you're also playing high-level football or something for a team, invariably if I look at those students, they will be the people who are really good at managing their time, and their quality does not diminish. And it's because they're forced to manage time. You know, there's external demands to get them to do time. So, and I think people who are not forced to manage time, who have endless amounts of time because they have someone at home who's making the meals, or doing the cooking, or looking after the people that they bring into their lives, their kids or their family or whatever, and that they have a huge amount of time, and they can stay late in the office, and I think that is, and then they celebrate that. It's a bit like if you're in the shit, learn to love shit, isn't it? So they really try and make that is a badge of honour that I have worked this excessive hours, and yet it's questionable whether that's really professional, really, you know. And is that not the root of the problem in architecture, that we often never get paid enough for the hours that we invest? You know, so I think all of these things, there's kind of, and for me that's also about the lack of diversity in the profession and in the studio. The more diverse people, like I have, well, obviously we have, I don't know if there are any students with kids and family that we have to look after, but you know, the more we have a diverse range of students, the more we have to change the studio to accommodate them, and I love that. You know, I think that tightens up our practices a bit better.
Can I ask students if anyone could contribute here to talk about the quality of feedback that they experience in studios and at crits, and the different kinds of feedback and the quality of it, the usefulness of it. For instance, can anyone talk about the problem of getting different opinions from different tutors, and the problem about being told a project is really good? We had this in Queen's recently in first year. Somebody was being encouraged all by me totally, and they got a dreadful crit, but I wasn't around. But you know this problem, anyone contribute to this experience with this? I'm asking a question about feedback, about work, about whether a crit helps you in the studio. What are the things that help you to learn, and the things that are less helpful?
I think, I don't know if I'm going to answer your question directly, but I'm going to say something which came up in your last discussion just then about crit. It's whether we think of the crit as learn more, Hassan, you learn more from humiliation than anything else. So you said that right at the end there, I don't know if anyone heard that. And I just thought that was the complete opposite way to how I view a crit. But it is actually, it depends how your crit is run as well, because sometimes you're encouraged to have a discussion with your critters. You don't enjoy calling them. Or you're just told to stand there and take it. And that's really strange to me, because that's kind of how it is here.
I based that sentence based on how I actually learned language, and that when I came in and I couldn't speak a language, I'd say a word wrong, and that when I got it wrong it was embarrassing, and that was the thing that really stuck in my brain, that kind of thing. And another thing is that with the discussion with tutors is that I find this sometimes, especially in first year, it's kind of hard to talk to someone that's on a different level to you, so when they talk about details and they kind of zoom in, because they are able to do that, just like someone else couldn't read a plan as well as someone who's read plans, I find it kind of difficult to actually be able to discuss something with them other than a conceptual level, so that listening to them and kind of taking in what they say, so it's kind of part of taking everything they say with a pinch of salt, it's kind of how you take it, but I guess sometimes it could, like I said, we're just people, and sometimes we say things that just, I think it's how you do it, and also sometimes people that work too much, I think that's sometimes an escape as well,
Sometimes you what?
It's an escape, a lot of people
Working is escape.
People don't want to deal with it, maybe he became bad at social situations because he just threw himself into that kind of thing because he didn't want to deal with that. Sometimes, there's definitely ways people can improve, and I don't know how, but and talking to students and stuff like that.
There's ways that the tutors can improve.
Yeah, or I don't want to put blame on one, because sometimes it's.
I don't know.
Sometimes I think it's frustration from an educator that someone isn't putting enough effort, that kind of annoys them or something like that. I can kind of understand that.
And all people who tutor you, are they practicing architects, or are they people who because there's a difference between someone who understands pedagogy and someone who understands architectural practice. Are you aware of those people?
I'm not always aware of that, so I'm not sure, but as well. Yeah, I'm not sure that, to be honest, but no, I think the most usually are they know what they're talking about, so I just don't know what I'm talking about. So
Students, Hassan just said, students know what they're talking about. I don't know what
I
they're
don't
talking
know that, but there's another thing as well.
about. Take note. Go on, another thing.
No, I'm gonna go with Sam saying that it's really hard to fight your view against someone who's so qualified in what they're doing, even if you have a reason for it. I don't know if that's what you're trying to say, Sam.
Yeah, it's sort of
especially when you're first year, you think of this, you look at the precedent, and then you're happy with it, and it's kind of just shot down. You can't. You're just silently sitting there. But as you grow, you get older,
I'm interested in your experience of the quality of the feedback. What I really mean is, how well thought out is it, for instance, the difference between a crit and talking one-to-one to a student? Or I mean, it's a leading question, I know, but would you have an experience of that? There's some better and some worse ways to get feedback in terms of information and.
One-on-one is kind of easier, because sometimes in a crit, as you were saying earlier, there can be contradicting arguments, and you're left feeling what is the best option. And sometimes it can get a bit personal, which is also not good.
When you talk about this and the way you're describing all of that, I definitely recognise it in architectural education. I would say it is a conservative type of architectural education. And the way that I think non-conservative, I don't know what the opposite of non-conservative, I don't necessarily, it's less aggressive.
Progressive. Not aggressive.
Progressive.
Could be
aggressive. It's because it sounds to me as if you're describing an architectural education which is judging the architectural output as opposed to the learning about architecture. And the point of you being here, or all of you being here, is about for you to learn how you do architecture. So it's about your practice, it's about you developing your position. And so even if there are contradictory viewpoints, which actually is a sign of a healthy school, some schools narrow and you get staff all in the same sort of band, or maybe 2 or 3 bands, effectively. But if you have a healthy school where there are really diverse voices, which means that you're going to get extremely contradictory views, then what that allows you to do is find your position between the voices. So it's a process of, in a way, triangulation. So you develop yourself as a designer and as a person. In the early stages, I think you develop mostly in opposition to something. So you see something you don't really like that, and maybe this goes back to the learning initially is a harsh thing, but eventually what happens is that you start to position yourself around things that you do. You start to identify what you do like, and you can also justify it. And so you're gradually, you're building up kind of a map of yourself in relation to other views and other positions and other ideas, and that then reinforces you as your own practitioner, you're developing as a creative practitioner, as opposed to someone whose architecture is being judged, the architectural output. In fact, what we should be doing is looking how well you are defining yourself.
Developing your own ideas.
Yeah, your own ideas and moving through your own learning.
I think this is why, for me, this project, I've come to realise it as we're sort of drawing towards the end of this part and towards the exhibition, and I've been writing about it in our time, which has forced me to like condense down what it is that I've been doing, and teaching the students who've been coming along this with me and people that will be coming to the talks that there should be space to be critical about the things you are taught and the dogma of it, or the fact that what you're taught is not everything, and there's lots of different viewpoints. So feminism is, and the talks before this, which have even some, have been focused on the fact of women who have not been put into history. So that's one way of being critical of the history of architecture. And the texts that we are reading and producing work through is about students being able to critically analyse texts and respond to them, and so therefore start to find out different theories in architecture that allow you in your sort of pencil case of tools, so that when you're said something by a studio tutor or a crit, you can say, I agree with that, I disagree with that because of this, this and this.
Yeah.
And so then you start to be able to form your own opinions, and you're not just a sponge accepting information, you're questioning it and filtering out what's right or what's wrong for you.
So you're going to introduce?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that I've just found that maybe there's sort of, I don't know if it's just in the school, but just in the studio culture, it's sort of like a lack of sort of real valuable feedback on your work, and I don't think the crit actually really helps that much, because it's just like, I've found, because I'm doing my thesis at the moment, just four cycles, so it's 4 crits, and we've kind of got to the stage where, despite having double the amount of crits of a normal semester, there's students now in the class that have no idea where they stand in terms of like sort of grades, or how they're going to do. They're like, they don't know if they're going down the sort of right track in terms of getting a good grade.
So
Because there's like the crits where it's like everyone discussing their ideas, and like it's new tutors each time. Your own tutors don't really speak to that, so it's like, oh, I like this idea, or like this, that. It's quite like abstract, but then you're having kind of real sort of proper discussions with your tutors at their studio desk tutorials, but still, like, I think sort of actual feedback on like how we're standing in terms of our grades, and like studying towards and what we can do to improve. Because really all we have is just this grade that we get in the summer at the end, and you just don't know.
What you just described is exactly my experience of being a student. How many years ago?
Nothing changed. Really.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing's changed. And the reason why that is, I think, is because we think we're teaching architecture. We think we're looking for an architectural output in architecture, because the majority of people who come to teach are practitioners and don't really know, with the best will in the world. And I think it's really important that we have practitioners in the School of Architecture. Don't get me wrong, but we definitely need people who understand the act of learning, and very specifically what it is to become a designer. Because I think learning to become a designer is a very wonderfully rich and very explicit, very precise kind of thing. And I'm not certain there's enough people. So I'm in exactly the same position as you. And in my final year, I didn't know what I really thought I was going to fail, because I got so much abuse. You know, I give abuse back, but they abuse me. So it was an equal, maybe not that equal, but in the end, I worked excessively hard because I had no clue. And when they gave me my grade, I went, if you only told me, I would have worked less. I would have been in control of my learning. And so I was furious. But I then spent the first part of my career looking at assessment, feedback. That was a huge big thing. But I don't think there's very many people in architectural education even read about architectural education.
Brian was going to ask something, and then I was going to ask Fernand as well to talk a bit about feedback, because I know I've talked to you about it. Maybe you say something about it. If you like this question about written feedback and so on. Brian, you were going to say something.
With the crits, I find them just very boring.
Yeah.
Like, the only interest, we've had, the crits this year have actually been kind of interesting in that we've invited people from the John Drum community to come in, and the only interesting crits are when guests come in, because you listen to your tutors' views all the time, they're boring. You know what's going to happen. Where the guest tutors come in, they know nothing about the project, they haven't come up with their own agendas for the project. You get very different views then coming in and a lot better discussion. They're really the only interesting ones, and we actually work with people outside the school.
But that's also the control. When we go back to what is it that controls and is the dominant view. Again, bringing voices that aren't architectural into an architecture school is probably the most radical thing you can do. You know, I mean, for sure, I've tried it on many occasions. In fact, I tried it here, and I tried it in Sheffield, which is regarded as being quite a social oriented school, and I was told that it would be too disruptive to the learning of the students to have real people talk about architecture with them.
Non-architects, you mean?
Non-architects, yeah. But I still do it, but it's not. It is incredibly interesting to hear what other people view architecture.
Just that problem can be exacerbated by the guest system. The guest system is the star system very often, the hierarchy of prestige among architects. So the very structure of architecture education, the problem with it is prestige, in that there's one class of qualified people, a whole other class of unqualified people who are encouraged to accept uncritically what the qualified people say. And that system is shown when you have a big crit, when a prestigious guest is. So in among the qualified people, you can see a hierarchy. And one day here, a few years ago, a student presented fantastic work. John Tooby was so proud of it, and was showing everybody this work. And then Carmen Pinos, who was a very prestigious architect, came in and just said, "You have ruined everything," to the student. And it was like this complete, one-line demolition of the whole thing. And there was this kind of awful, embarrassed, kind of everyone looking at the floor. And Yvonne Farrell, who was here, went, "I think what Carmen is trying to say is that, as one architect to another, you can have this kind of conversation." And I was like, bollocks, like this student was just being bombed by somebody with massive amounts of social capital. And that was the purpose of the whole thing, was to expose the student to this massive weight of, unquestioned opinion.
That's an interesting term, actually, the idea of capital, and it links back to what Hassan and you were just bouncing there, is that perhaps your idea is that you don't have enough social capital not social capital, intellectual capital?
Cultural capital.
Cultural capital, it's time we discussed last year, to be in a position to say something, because the person you're saying it to has so much more cultural capital.
Yeah, I think there's like a lack of collaboration. Like it's more like the crit is like what I think, and it's rather like not what are you trying to do and how can I improve this with you and with my knowledge kind of thing. There's the lack of that. I think that it's not like it takes a lot more effort. I think to probably sit down and kind of think, what are you thinking? And I want to get on your level and kind of collaborate and pick it up. Maybe I don't know.
Paulo Freire, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, his famous book on this subject, how teaching links in with systems of oppression because of this capital issue.
How did the student react? Like, were they defensive of
Absolutely.
their work, or did they accept it?
The Carmen Pinos moment, it was just extraordinary. Like, it was just it was so outrageous, that just to say this to a student. And then, Yvonne tried to recover the whole thing by going, well, this is how architects speak to each other. No, it isn't. Like, none of them want to remain on any kind of friendly terms. I mean, the student was just devastated, I presume. But then afterwards, after she left, And Yvonne left, John and Sheila just said to their group, oh listen, forget that, that was just an experience, now we move on. And this is the kind of thing that happens in practice, and you know, you could argue this. One of the big arguments for our system is you get beaten up here so that when you get beaten up later, it's not so bad. And that's kind of an argument for beating people up. You know, start doing it as soon as possible. Why don't we just beat up young children then? So that, you know, sorry, Claude, you
I don't know, I just think like, I don't know, I would have liked to have seen that, I think, if someone just completely being like, no, nothing is right about this project. Because like, I think in a project that you have certain parts of it where you're like, yeah, this is like, this like, part is like definite, like this has to happen, and then other parts you're unsure, so like you have to kind of be open to that, and like I think it's weird for someone to be like, no, like yeah, okay, I'm totally wrong. Like surely he would have like stood up for his project a little bit, or kind of like just being like, well, why do you think this, instead of I just think it would be interesting to watch.
have you ever seen a conversation though in a crit though?
You get so shocked.
Yeah, I can understand that, but at the same time.
I've never seen a proper conversation. They're just talking a little bit about written feedback, because one of the things Patrick is doing in DIT, in third year this year, is one of the crits, the intern crit, the middle crit, has been replaced by you hand in your projects on Thursday night, the tutors have a meet in pairs on the Friday, and they write a page, or whatever it is, of written feedback about the project. The students love this, because it doesn't have to mean they're getting a good review, but they're getting thought out responses. I've talked to you about this before, I don't know whether you want to contribute
Actually,
here.
no, I do, because I attended all your crits. We were in all our crits together all the way.
You and I, yes.
I think, comparatively speaking, I think architecture is strange among the art forms in that everyone starts at an age which is much later than you would start in music, or you would start in dance, or you would start in art. And so I think it's also strange that we reserve our greatest critical forces and attention for our youngest practitioners, which are you guys. And so just at the point when in other art forms it would be regarded as completely inappropriate to visit that kind of criticism on a, say, 4-year-old piano student, we decide to kind of launch full-scale mortar attacks. So I think the aggression that's present in many crits to very young students of their discipline would not be acceptable in virtually any other discipline that I can think of. And I also think it's strange in that when you move into the profession, you may not publish a negative review in Irish Architect, and on any building, if you produce a negative review, it will be returned to you until it is positive. Now that is not a critical environment for any discipline to operate. And I generally work as a historian now, and it's accepted, if any of you read our current professor of history's reviews in the Irish Times, which are really brutal. But at that level, when you're at that stage of your profession, it's fair game if you publish something, you can expect to be on a full page of a newspaper, torn to shreds. But that's when you've been at your game for like 25 years. So in architecture, it's the reverse. People experience the greatest critical focus when they're least able to deal with it, and when it's arguably, when they're very vulnerable, and also when it's destructive. And then our senior practitioners never get any criticism or review. Nobody likes a negative review, really, of anything that goes on in Irish architecture.
Such a brilliant observation. I love that. I've never heard anybody say it like that.
The editor sends you back a few suggested changes to your article. Could you change "don't like" to "like"? Maybe it just reads better.
No, I think I know of a few instances where that has happened.
Yes.
And then in terms of written feedback, I've often said that if you like something, you have to sign off on it. Like, it may be very cutting, but you have to accept the fact that you may have to like stand up in a court of law and argue that this is a reasonable.
Yeah.
So every time you write, it's automatically much more considered.
Yeah.
And so I fully support, like, written feedback takes much longer to produce, and there's a much greater weight of assessment. It's a lot more work for the tutors. But it has to be considered, and it also has to be measured, and you can't just say whatever comes into your head. And that's the problem.
I work with other disciplines, other creative disciplines, so I would know, a good range, but I work a lot with textile guys, and I have to say that I've learned a lot from working with other creative practitioners about about how they use critique and how much more precise they are in their critique. So we've ended up developing stuff we call spreadsheet critique. It's that precise, and so they'll allow themselves immense freedom and huge playfulness and madness, and then all the work is put out in a very systematic way and really read very tightly, so it's like a tight reading of text or something, and systematically critiqued each thing. But they still allow themselves to say, I like it or I don't like it, because that's the personal motivation between you and the thing that you want to engage in. That's the engine that drives your work. But then alongside, do you like it or don't like it, what is it that takes it to move it forward, or what things are. And I totally agree. I think that understanding the value of, and this is, we talk about crits, and they're a negative thing, but if you really understand how valuable they can be to you as well, because it's, I have this naff phrase about thinking that creativity is like the sister element to critique on the kind of periodic table of architecture. The two things have to sit, so you have to be super creative, really free, really open, and daring to try things, and then you have to be super critical of your own work. And those crits that we put within the structure aren't just there to assess it, it's parcel of our practice. But we don't make that explicit, we don't talk about how that's useful. And again, I would say that the voice I want to hear most in the crit is the student's voice. Not just to describe what they've done, but to tell me what they think is not quite right there, or what they really like, because it's really important that you also learn to valorize your own work and really love and learn to love it in order to carry it to fruition. So it's that self-critical voice that I really want to hear in the review more than anybody else is just flowing in. There's
Kaz and somebody else
some
here.
people here.
Sorry.
So I'm American. I did my undergrad in the States, and it's actually interior design. And then I came here and did my master's in architecture. And it's interesting to hear everyone saying how I felt, because my undergrad was really, we always had the architecture professors sit in on our crits, but it was very different the way the architects would talk about it, the way the interiors would talk about it. And I sometimes wondered if it was strictly because architecture professors were always men. We didn't have any women's professors, and then the interiors were always women. But it was like, generally, like, everyone was trying to get to the same point, but it was like with architecture, it almost felt like it was a general, it didn't quite feel like you could quantify and move forward what they were saying. Whereas like when I critiqued some interiors, it was always like, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, from the standpoint of like the human being in the building. And so it felt like you could move forward. Whereas like all of my critiques here, like I've generally felt like I have no idea what I'm doing and like what I'm supposed to be doing and where I'm supposed to be going. So then in turn, I'm kind of like, what am I learning? Because it doesn't feel like I can ever like be like, okay, this is what I did do, this is what I didn't do, and this is how I can move forward. And I didn't know if that was a difference in education in Maryland and in the States, or the different profession, but it was just, in undergrad, it was just like, yeah, like they want you to develop who you are as a designer and like as a person, but it was very like, this is either gonna not work or it is gonna work. I mean, it's gonna pass code or it's not. Like, so it's kind of like there's some things that I just feel like can be quantified, and they're just, I don't know, I just feel like I'm like, what am I doing?
Can I reply slightly to that?
Yes.
One thing that we don't talk about enough is how much taste plays a role
Yeah.
in the assessment of design. You mentioned what I like and what I don't like, and this is perfectly valid. But there are other structures to do with the taste, to do with positions, aesthetic positions. And you could say, and Bourdieu says, that the fact is that pedagogic, I'll read one other thing. He says, the selection of meanings which objectively defines a group's or a class's culture as a symbolic system is arbitrary, insofar as the structure and functions of that culture cannot be deduced from any universal principle, whether physical, biological, or spiritual, not being linked by any sort of internal relation to the nature of things or any human nature. The idea of arbitrary is really important. That ultimately the values, cultural values that we're assessing they're not objective, they're not measurable most of the time. You can measure the workings of a building in certain ways, but a lot of what goes on in crit is a judgment of taste. And there's a thin line between that and facile, fashionista kind of stuff. But I believe architectural phenomenology adds a big, heavy ballast to that process, so that people really believe that they're making judgments, ethical judgments about it, but they're actually judgments of taste. And
I think it's a really, really good point, because one of the things I'm currently interested in is reinstating an ethical and aesthetic discussion back into architectural education, because we don't talk about aesthetics. We certainly don't do it overtly, and actually aesthetics, because I've been looking, there's a lot emerging now in text around this concept of social aesthetics, and the notion that aesthetics is part of our value system. So there's aesthetics, there's ethics, and there's politics. Politics the most out there one of the values, and then there's the ethical position, which we can somewhat, it's kind of a in-between one. But aesthetics is it's a value system that's for the most part very much embodied within us. And people are now starting to talk about aesthetics as being, the more we seek to understand the aesthetic of the other, the more we drive again towards social justice. So it's the pursuit of an understanding of the aesthetic, what your aesthetic is in comparison to mine, what your aesthetic, all of this is about the pursuit of social justice and equality, which is incredible, because aesthetic is the hidden value system that we within this room struggle to understand. What are we supposed to like? What architecture are we supposed to be in tune with? And if we don't open that discussion up to not just our own selves, not just people coming in year one, but also to people in society, broader society, there'll always be a gap. People will always say, "Oh, architects say weird things," but why can't we have that discussion about the aesthetics of architecture?
Cal, you were going to say something.
I'm not sure if it's a recent thing for fourth year, and maybe just because the people who've been teaching fourth year last year have changed, but it's like a breath of fresh air compared to the middle school. Like the nature in which I'm receiving feedback is really, like they're speaking to you like they're on the same level as you. But it's strange because and you've mentioned a few times that the purpose of the crit should be to assess whether the student is learning, not to assess whether the work is good or not, whether it's architecture or not, because we've only been doing this for a couple of years. So the only you have this impression that the second and third years I don't like that tutor because they're really harsh. Like in fourth year, so far all the tutors have actually been it's very constructive. It's very I'm not sure if it was the same.
I think that's it. I think that's essentially so much more constructive.
Yeah.
What would you say? Can you say what does that mean in your practice?
It means that you feel like you're being evaluated for how you're learning. It's kind of the idea of research is brought into the fore really in fourth year. You kind of mentioned briefly with reasons and stuff in third year, but if you have a research-led project, then that's a thing that you can do. So that's what you're doing is being evaluated, and we receive lectures from how to research maps and research this, that, and the other. But there's no kind of the girl from America was saying the difference between the schools is quite a radical thing, and the taste is quite it changes from country to country. We have lots of Erasmus students here, and the nature in which they have crits, they think that fourth year here is it's different, but it's nicer than where they're from, because it's less harsh. So you feel like your work is being evaluated based on how you did it. So if you did comprehensive research, but I think initially the students should be taught more how to do that kind of work. Which it seems a bit late in the day to be teaching the second year and fourth year, what we should have been learning in the second year.
Anyone else on that? John?
Yeah, I gave feedback there in the forum. The lack of explicit teaching for a lot of aspects of architecture is quite astounding. And
Astounding.
Yeah, in first year we had a tutor who sat us actually in this room and told us for a particular project that we were all on the same playing field, and therefore the levels that we achieved should all relatively be similar to each other, and I just thought that was so unjustified to assume that we were all on the same playing field when some of us had never used the program before in our entire lives, and there was no teaching going to be done for the program either. It was just this assumption that was made about our skills, which we didn't have obviously, or some of us didn't have. And the other thing about quiz I wanted to say is how I feel they're very undemocratic in terms of the time management of them. And to begin with, some person could have a 45-minute crit, despite the fact that there's 11 more people to go in 3 hour space. And by the end of that 3 hours, the people at the end are getting a 5-minute crit, a very rushed crit, having sat through 3 hours of other people getting much more time. And I think that's a really unfair system.
Can I just to contextualise that? If I remember correctly, last year you used to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you actually have a very more architecture teachers don't get taught how to teach. But
Some of them do.
But I remember thinking when I was in undergrad in studio, we had a student who was I thought he was just a terrible teacher because he was just so harsh and unproductive in his criticism. And I remember asking around, like, because all through primary and secondary education, all your teachers are taught to be professional teachers. But when you're an architect, you're a professional architect who teaches at university. And so that's a very different distinction, and you're probably quite an interesting place to have a very firm idea of what is helpful to you guys.
There's a lot of problems with the teaching system because the way they teach like teachers is they teach you like that there's like a group of 30 students and you know, they're going to listen to you and they're all going to actually sit there and follow what you're saying, but really you're teaching 30 different individuals. Like, so it's actually hypothetical. Like, it doesn't really, I don't know.
I think it might be worth pointing out that no university educator is taught how to educate, no matter what program you come from, maths, physics, science, or architecture. I mean, an awful lot of the points that we made today apply in the program. I happen to be an architect. I'm actually thinking about science students are supposed to subtilize English. There isn't much conversation going on at that level. I think it's really shocking how little conversation goes on within a class of design students. And well, just from listening to what you guys have been saying, because I don't teach in the architecture school, but I think it's quite shocking to think how little you might discuss things. And while talking about ethics and aesthetics, so at the crit, we're judging the aesthetics of form. There's an invisible function, you might say the function is reflected in the form, but the ethics of the building is something we never discuss insofar as materiality of materials, provenance, the whole that's left behind somewhere, children are down in those mines, and also the length of life of the building, you've got the carbon, how is it getting to...
Yeah, and the people who build it.
All things in nature have a lifespan and come to an end, and we never think about the coming together. Where all these parts of this building come from, how long it exists for, and how does it return to nature?
There's actually
more,
there's more of a chance that we would talk about ethics in architectural schools than aesthetics. It's definitely more discussion around ethics that I've witnessed. I don't think I've ever.
But there's latent aesthetics like all the time.
Unacknowledged. I think to clear it, this is important that we pronounce judgments of taste. That's not the same thing as discussing aesthetics. Discussing aesthetics is to acknowledge the facts of aesthetics, and there are various ways of discussing aesthetics, and there are more
as laid
issues.
down by experts as well. So it's this discussion could be more interesting.
Well, the idea of the university is founded on the idea of experts. I mean,
Yeah.
if you deconstruct the idea of an expert, there's no university.
Well, there's
That's a
different
question.
university. So is there not university scolaris and university? There's a university that's based on the fact that we're all learners, which I would contest. The reason why it's better at master's level is because your tutors are learning from you. What's fantastic is whenever you get to a point where you go off and do your own research and bring knowledge into the studio where the tutors haven't necessarily been in that zone. So there is a notion that we move from being the teacher-student relationship into the collection of learners, which is the most pleasurable place to teach.
I think experts have no problem with a lecturer who is qualified a lecturer. It's a democratic thing, because that lecturer has to defend their work. Like you say, they can be torn apart by their peers into that structure. So there is a true democracy there, a democracy of ideas. And just because the form of a lecture doesn't mean because people who don't know something and somebody else does know something. The crit is a different thing, I believe. Guys, it's 2 o'clock, and I'm very conscious, it's just actually 5 past, I'm really conscious of the fact that we did say we just wanted to. And I want to honour that because I'm so happy that so many people came, because I know that you have to go back to do endless drawings to try and appease the gods of architecture, and that you can never do that. and that your lives are simply going to be wasted in this vain pursuit. Notwithstanding that, it's so good that you came and that you participated. In fact, the success of the event has been a little bit, in a way, a little bit harder to have because it's more precious, more difficult for people to discuss. But thanks for everyone for contributing. And thanks Chloe and Lana and the others who organised this whole series. I've learned so much coming to these. Unfortunately, I could only make 3 or 4 of them, but it's been such a brilliant initiative and we've learned so much. So thank you very much.